Hello friends, Namaskar. Good morning here in Bombay. I don't know what it is wherever you are. On behalf of the National Center for the Performing Arts Mumbai, a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you all for joining us for this workshop on the very interesting topic of archiving of music. At the outset, we would like to express our gratitude to HSBC India as our esteemed supporters. Their generous support helps us to cover a 3-day festival titled Bandish, which will come up in August. Besides this, they also support 3 gurus who teach totally 9 disciples, a 3-day session of masterclasses, 4 workshops aimed at developing what we call as soft skills, such as the one today. And we are pleased to present the 3rd workshop of this financial year today on the vital subject of archiving of music. As members of artistic fraternity, we are all aware about the importance of archiving. This workshop is essentially meant to provide an introduction and basic information on archiving of music, primarily the audiovisual archiving related to South Asia in general and India in particular. It will address fundamental issues like what is meant by archiving, the basic fundamental question, how we may go about it, what aspects have to be considered, and most importantly, what is the significance of archiving to start with. Today we are fortunate to have with us Dr. Shubha Chaudhuri, who has been the director at the Archives and Research Center for Ethnomusicology of the American Institute of Indian Studies for the past 4 decades. She has been active in holding training workshops for archiving and ethnomusicology and has served as consultant with WIPO Creative Heritage Project with UNESCO for the Cultural Mapping Project and for interactive museums. Her current projects include digitization of legacy audio collections as well as a project on the ballad traditions of Manganiyar and Langa musician in Western Rajasthan. So we are indeed very fortunate to have an experienced person like her, personally my friend for a long time now. We take this opportunity to thank Dr. Chaudhuri, and the duration is about 60 minutes. We have provided a link. You may post your questions there. After 60 minutes, I shall take them up with Dr. Chaudhuri. Over to you, Dr. Chaudhuri.
Good morning, namaste to wherever you are. Thank you very much, Dr. Rao and NCPA for inviting me for this workshop. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank NCPA for the long connection that we have had with the archives and with many other programs. So, turning to our topic today, archiving music, as this is meant to be a workshop session, we will talk about the major areas. One, to just introduce archives and music, then to go on to how we organize, deal with cataloging and metadata. Before that, deal with the very all-important issue of digitization, and end with the issue of rights and ethics, all of which are very important. As you would be quite aware, an hour is barely the tip of the iceberg for any of these topics. Each one can fill a 1-week workshop with no difficulty, as we have done sometimes. I just hope that at the end of it, we don't have to say why it is important to archive music. I hope, like anything else, it hopefully comes through in what we discuss. So to situate what archives are, if we look at it very widely, today archives are also present in many kinds of institutions. So we would say archives are one of what we may call memory institutions. So archives store memories, and I think very important for us to remember this aspect, that archival materials create memories. They become a repository of memories, and from the past we create memories based on archival materials. So how are archives a little different from libraries or museums? So as you know, most of us are used to libraries. The most common is that they have publications. Libraries have published materials and are meant for public access. That's the job of libraries, to be open to the public. Museums also, but museums are largely of objects. In these days we are talking about all kinds of digital objects also in museums. Its curatorial display is the important part of museums, and it is also meant for public access. So display is the most important part for museums. Now archives, which is our topic for the day, they are meant with unique documents. So archives are meant to store what are called unique materials. The basic premise is preservation. The most important aspect of archives is preservation, not just collection, as very often we are led to believe. And there is access, but controlled access, because when we are talking about original material, and we'll discuss this later, and holds collections largely. So that is just a way to situate what we have. So coming to music archives, what does such an archive hold? So we talk largely here of unpublished recordings. As Dr. Rao already said, this is our focus for today. But they may also have photographs, images, documents, manuscripts, ephemera, and even published recordings which support. All of these are meant to be supporting the unpublished recordings, the unique materials that we have. So music archives obviously will share a lot with other archives in general. And as we come to the issue that we are going to focus not on all these other things, which will all have their own standards for archiving, we will be focusing on unpublished recordings. So there we share a lot with other audiovisual archives. So in general, what do archives mean? As we said already, it's a preservation of the original, and increasingly we talk of this as preservation of the content. As we move to digitization and to preservation formats, we do not always are able to rely on the original for access. So we have to preserve the content in whichever way we can. An archive should ideally have policies for acquisition and selection. How does an archive define itself? It has to be organized through cataloging, metadata, and whatever other systems to be able to access as well as preserve. And an archive should have policies of access and dissemination. So archives, as we stress, go way beyond just collecting material. Now, what do we share with other audiovisual archives? One is that we are talking, when we talk about preserving the originals, we are talking a lot of legacy materials, analog materials, of original materials. Now, the storage and handling of legacy recordings is very important and very difficult, as they are very fragile and they need temperature and humidity control, they need proper storage conditions. We need to follow standards of preservation and digitization now, as do other audiovisual archives, and currently we need to follow the norms of preservation metadata, to which we shall come later. So we share all these with all other audiovisual archives, regardless of whether they are of music or not, but it's important to flag this at this point. So why should we archive? So we always think of archives as historical records, and historically it was so. Archives were collections of state records to start with, of the governments, and then it moves on to other forms of archives, and cultural archives come up and more specific archives come up, and today we have in India a lot of archives coming up with institutions, even with corporate bodies. So it becomes a way of preserving your past with the idea of it being available for the future. Now, what we do not always think that today's present is soon going to be past. Everybody's idea of archives is always the past, how old. As visitors to our archive, often will ask, what is the oldest recording you have? then even if we have a piece of an ephemera, a little bill or a train ticket or anything from 1940s or 30s, it becomes an amazing thing. An advertisement that came in a magazine 50, 60 years ago, suddenly people are very interested in it. It has great significance. We see how different advertisements were or whatever was. So within something is older, we find it very interesting. But if we do not think of archiving our present, then we are missing that, because just one day later the present is the past. And so the whole perception we have of archival value is of something old. But if we do not carefully archive the present, it will not be available for the future. So this is something that we really need to bear in mind. Now, coming a little more specifically to India, so I would look at music not very narrowly, but as part of the large oral traditions we have in India, South Asia, where such music was orally transmitted. And so what was the kind of background where we are today? One important reason to archive music or to record music even is the ephemeral nature of music and performance. Whatever you're performing or singing or whatever music is over the minute it finishes being performed. So that makes recording the only way in which it gets stored. In only one, it gives it a fixity that we can go back to. And every performance we know is different. As a result, the recordings become very important, because the whole nature of music and others are that it's ephemeral. Sure. Now, what we had in these oral traditions, interestingly, if you think of it, is that we had for generations, preservation was through performance. We did not have archives for many years, but we had lineages through which it was kept alive and goes from generation to generation. People became a little more aware of the kind of break in transmission that had been happening in our traditional lineages for some time. The rapid changes that were taking place, largely due to technology. Music always changes, all performance change, but it was felt in the last century that the changes were a little more fast. And then there was more access to technology. Not just in the days of wire recordings or so, when there were very few people who had access. So as more access to technology comes, we see that in India, like in other places, the impulse to record, document and preserve increased. I would say right from 70s, 80s, we find most archives in India dealing with music or performance came up in that period, because there was a feeling of urgency of documenting maybe what there is to archive it. So, coming to music archives, mainly would fall into two categories, and it's not like they're separate. Every archive can have both. So you have the kind of repository model where existing collections of recordings, which are already made by people, are deposited in an archive for preservation and obviously for access. There is no point for an archive to have material if it cannot give access. And then there is archives which come out of documentation or active attempts to record with the explicit purpose of creating an archival record of a tradition, genre or any other aspect. Now, many archives may have both. You may take in recordings as well as want to create archivings out of the documentation that you create. But largely there would be one or the other, and we have many now which have been created in the past few decades of documentation. Now, using of archives, why should we have archives if they cannot be used? So, the interesting thing I always find of somebody who worked in archives for so many years, that archival material can be used in ways that go beyond the impulse that created them. What I mean by that is, you may have created a recording for the purpose of learning, or just to record a concert, or for whichever reason that you recorded it. It does not prevent somebody from wanting to refer to it for any other reason. It may be that particular community somebody is interested, or the kind of song it is, or the what rag it is, or looking at it as a performer. You may want to look at the text, you may want to look at meter, you may want to look at the historical context, you may want to look at anything. It does not prevent it from being used only in the way in which it was made. So when a recording reaches an archive, it should be made available in a multitude of ways. So only if it is preserved will this be available to future generations. Now, very often people think, why should they go to how is the archive more useful when I can just go out and listen to somebody, or we can just travel and hear various forms of music which are very active, fortunately, in our country. So what a collection of material, collection of recordings does in an archive, it gives you access which is beyond time and space. What I mean by that is, if you want to look at a historical perspective, you want to see how this particular form, or even how a performer has changed in their performance over a few decades. An archive can give you, because of the sheer collection, can give you that kind of range of time, also of space, geographic. You cannot just charge all over the country looking at anything. If I'm interested in wedding songs, for example, in an archive, I can access the wedding songs from everywhere in India that we may have recordings of. Or we want to look at any specific kind of context, or we want to look at only women performers. We can do that. So just the fact of it being a collection of multiple records gives us many options for analysis, or for learning, teaching, and very importantly, creates records for the community which created it, which performed it, and who may want to go back to it for their own heritage and for learning. So there are various ways in which archives can be used, and it's a short time to discuss all of them. So if we say that we do not look at music in a very narrow way for archives, in my sense, we would look at music in all contexts. Now, this is important because the way we look at context is also how it would have implications for how we give access and how we work with them. And we look at music as a form of cultural expression. We don't look at music as a standalone performance in a concert. We look at music making as a wider activity, dealing in all contexts. So, whether it's performance, whether it's part of ritual, we also look at oral histories, interviews, narratives, documentation, all forms that may feed in to music as a cultural expression. Now, by that what I mean is, it could be music as part of, related to dance, related to theatre, related to devotional practice. As we know in India, the largest part of our repertoire deals with devotional music and with ritual practices. So all of this is something that we would include in a music archive. So that is in brief a kind of description that we have. I would like to go on to the topic of digitization, which is today the topic that is most discussed and is the most relevant probably to look at the future of archives as we go on. So what I mean by digitization is, it has made us think of going beyond preserving the carrier to the content. By the carrier we mean the recording format on which it was, a cassette or a reel or whatever it was. We looked for years as archives to preserving those, to making sure we had the right storage conditions, that we were handling them correctly, because that was our material, our archival material. Today, when we do digitization, what are we doing? We're transferring the content. So it has made us taken the focus from preserving the carrier to preserving the content. Now, whether this is something that we want to stick to is something we can discuss. So why are we digitizing? Is there a choice? I very often feel that we were doing very well in the analog era. We had learned how to look after our media. We knew all the composition of tape material and so on. We knew the temperature and humidity. We knew how to monitor it regularly. And we could have gone on forever. We knew how to handle, we knew how to give access copies. We could do whatever. We couriered tapes to people who wanted to use. It's not like there was no way of dealing with dissemination. So why did we have to move? Largely because of hardware obsolescence, by which we mean is there are increasingly no playback mechanisms for the older formats. That the market is moving away, has moved away from analog formats, and archives do not control the market share. So we are not able to control that, and we have to go with the time. So if we want to keep accessing our material, we are forced to digitize. So changing technology as well as that has done it, as the internet coming up at the same time, is just not digitization, has created demands of access which were hitherto we just could not have believed. When we started the archive that I work in 1982, the fact that we would be able to give access to material anywhere in the world without more time, without spending on postage or any other form was quite unthinkable. Or that things could be so-called published in a way that we do not think of without any separate mechanism was just not possible to understand. With that, it's created an expectation of use. Today, everybody they do not want to visit an archive. They just think they should be able to get the material wherever they are. Why can't I access it pressing a button in my bedroom? Now, so we have to think of these things. We may not give in to them fully, but it's something we have to take cognizance of. But also, it has greatly helped us for communication and convergence of different things. So we have to look at this kind of movement and see that, yes, there's really no choice for us but to go for digitization. So what are the pros, as we have discussed a little bit? So preservation and storage, there is a great benefit because there is no generation loss. All digital material, zeros and ones as we say, there is no wear and tear, which was a big factor in analog archives. And it stalls degeneration for digital objects. For example, if you have photographs and so on which are getting discolored, at least you stall that process. You are now capturing it as it is. You have a tape that's falling apart from the moment you digitize it. It's at least held on at that process. You do not go back and you can't revive what it was. But, it stalls that. These are the benefits. It's much easier to give access, as we already discussed. We can give access over the internet. We don't have to sit around making a copy for every user. So access becomes very much easier. You're able to give it over the internet or in whichever way you want. As a result, dissemination. What do we mean by dissemination? Is publishing it in a wider way. We use the word dissemination rather than publication because there are so many forms of dissemination today that go beyond conventional publishing. And physical storage. So physical storage of the multiple object types that we had. We all had a lot of physical formats in the analog world. And this is our legacy material. So we had various kinds of, if you just look at audio, we had reels, we have cassette, we have DATs, we have PCMs, various kinds of formats, similar with video. But now all of those become reduced to files. And the benefits also are that we are not now looking at specialized systems, how to store them, how to preserve them, how to create backups, because it becomes part of the IT mainstream. So a backup system for a bank is the same as a backup for an archive today. So we're not needing to have that very specialized knowledge, because once it's digitized, it doesn't matter, it doesn't need a audio engineer to deal with it. You need the audio engineer to create that digital copy. But after that, it just becomes management of computer data like any other. So those are some of the pros. Now, some of the cons is that digital technology, there is no permanent solution. We've already looked at many formats that have been changing through the years. By the time archives try to be very conventional and come to an archival standard, there have been many solutions. We've already seen so many digital formats that were considered very good. I can remind you of when CDs were thought to be the best possible audio quality, the most permanent, until we have seen CDs shattering and we say, oh, this is only 44.1. No, it's not good enough. We used to use the word CD quality as the best. No more. So that's what I mean. There is no permanent solution with digital technology, which leads to constant migration. We're not of the analog days. We made our preservation copies on reel or whatever, and we just stored them very carefully for many years. Today, we have to migrate our digital content every maximum 5 years. So the kind of ease of storage, it's just changed to another kind of challenge of storage. And as a result of resources, because every archive now has to budget moving their digital material every 5 years to different forms of digital storage as various formats keep becoming outdated. Oh, this kind of drive will not work, this kind of connector will not work. So we have to keep migrating data. Then when we digitize, there's a compression. Every digital copy is a compression with loss and maybe lossless, which creates very large files. And again, we have a variety of formats. It's not like we got freedom from the variety of formats. We don't have tapes and cassettes and reels and DATs, but now we have again a lot of formats. You have AAFFI files, you've got WAV files, you've got MP3s, you've got MP4s. It goes on changing all the time. So you have a variety of formats to handle also. So those are some of the disadvantages. Looking at the internet, the digitization, and all our new technologies, the advantage is that it allows us to preserve and to restore. Digital technology provides much easier ways of restoration than we had in the analog days. To safeguard and promote, we are able to use our materials with much greater ease with educational and scholarly opportunities, as we are using today a Zoom format to reach many people in all parts of the world because of the internet technology with much ease. I mean, to do something like this would have been so difficult a couple of decades ago. Now that helps to enhance cultural exchange because music traditions that could have been very niche are able to reach audiences all over. And we find many cases where, little groups of people have formed around maybe a regional group or a particular diasporic groups all get together with the interest of kind of niche things. You find people collecting because that's kind of easy to do. So it has increased the reach of kind of music into various areas. You don't have to think of, who would be interested in listening to this? Maybe not in your city, but there is a world audience for it out there. So this internet and the new technologies allow us to do that. What are some of the problems and pitfalls we're looking at already? Is the unauthorized use of culturally sensitive material. This is something we're not able to prevent. Commercial exploitation. And what I find strange is there's commercial exploitation comes in various ways. It may not be direct. We always, as archives, used to try and guard against commercial use by thinking we could put some levy on if things got sold or people made money. But with the internet, we find that there are new ways coming up because a lot of people want to share even if there's no revenue from it, just because they want to share, whether it's theirs to share or not. So we have these kind of problems. A very good example is all the YouTube channels where the performers get nothing, but the ad revenue goes to the person who has the channel. So it's all kinds of different ways are coming where there is some form of exploitation. And as a result, violation of moral and ethical rights. It gives its way open to these with much greater ease. Because of the much greater ease of use, the ease of access, it has opened the way to all these problems. So when we are talking about digitization, coming to preservation, which is our basic goal in archiving, As archives, we have obligations. This is something I really would like to stress because today we are digitizing in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of non-standard ways, which is not going to help preservation. So I've used a quotation here from the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives to say that it is integral to the preservation of audio, the formats, resolutions, carrier, and technology systems selected to adhere to internationally agreed standards. Now, we cannot expect every individual to do that, but we do expect that archives should pay attention to standard formats, resolutions, because if you go on doing all kinds of things, it will not lead to, as we know, you have to keep transferring, you have to keep migrating content, and if you go on using non-standard ways, you won't be able to migrate. So that is a really important obligation of archives, is to do the best they can by way of digital preservation. I just wanted to touch upon this topic of storage of the original. So many people say, if you are digitizing, do we need to keep our originals? In my view, yes, we do. At ARCE, where I work, we store our originals with a lot of care with temperature and humidity conditions. So why is that? A few thoughts. Well, archives are meant to preserve the original. But on the other hand, we know that hardware obsolescence makes the recordings inaccessible. So a lot of people feel, what is the point of keeping these? But an important reason is to remember that originals can benefit from future technologies. So when we're looking at digitization, we've come a long way in the last decade even in what we are able to extract from an analog recording to digital materials, that we are able to create a much better digital copy today than we could 10 years ago. If we did not have the original analog to work from, we would lose that. So with all that, we know that digital is not the end all and be all. If new technologies come, if higher resolution becomes possible, if ways to play back those analog formats, who knows? Who knew that turntables would make a comeback? So all of these kinds of issues are there, and if you lose your original, you lose all your future possibilities. So in my view, it is still important, but that's a topic that needs to be opened in any case. Another situation coming in our situation in India is what I call the digital dissolve. We used to talk about the digital divide, but today smartphones have broken that digital divide entirely. So we have a large amount of undocumented audiovisual recordings being created by people all over the place. They are getting shared and disseminated. So it's like a cloud of material that's been created, going around. They don't get documented. They do not get stored in any way. And the penetration of the internet in rural India has even increased this. So you have communities who people are able to record themselves, pass it on, they record a performance, it's gone to a whole group that they're using on WhatsApp. It doesn't require literacy now. See, this is a major point, that you needed to be literate to have technical training, to deal with creating recordings, to share them, to send them around. In the last few years, you do not. And the advantage is that you are dealing directly with audiovisual material, and you can just share it, and you can create it, and you can make reels and do whatever without any form of literacy whatsoever. So that's really changed the landscape of what is going on in India. And very often I think that there has to be a way to capture this information, because it's fleeting, it's going to be ephemeral, it's not going to last more than the next model of phone. But that is something that we have to take in account when we think of archiving music in all its forms. Just something to raise as an issue that we need to think about. So coming to the same issue, if you say archives in the times of YouTube, it's like love in the time of cholera, is why a lot of people say, why should you have archives if you have YouTube? Because you have so many recordings. You do not have to go through archives and their policies of access and permissions and signing forms and doing all this. It's free and easy access. You get a lot of material and it's free, in any way that you want to use. And a lot of people find it very useful as a free use of publicity. A lot of musicians, a lot of performers want to use YouTube because you reach a large audience. And today, you do not have to try and mail brochures to 1,000 people. So it's a big benefit to a lot of people. But there are lots of problems. Can it replace archives? I think not. They're not documented for the most part. You do not know the source from where they came. It's totally uncertain. No benefit goes to performers. There's no assurance of preservation on YouTube, and we can go on and on. So there are many, many ways in which it is not there, but it's creating a false expectation. I constantly find users who come and say, oh, I did some research and I couldn't find anything on this particular topic. So where did you look? On the internet. So it's creating a false feeling that it's not just YouTube, I've used that as a catchphrase, but this feeling that if it's not on the internet, it doesn't exist. This is a really dangerous trend, and we really need to think about it because there's a lot that's not, and there's a lot that never will be. Who is going to put a 12-hour narrative performance on the internet? Where are we going to have night-long performances? Or where are we going to look at some very niche oral epics or whatever? They're not. You're only going to put up things that are publicly accessible, that are popular, and that people want, somebody feels that they want, because the whole benefit of it is just how many people are going to listen to it. So it's skewing in a way that we already know that of music appreciation, of music making, is getting altered by this phenomenon. Excuse me. So then we've talked about the fact that we may record, we may collect, and we know we have to preserve. Not gone into the details of preservation, which is different for analog, as I said, different for digital. But we need to organize the archives. Otherwise, they will not be useful and they will not be usable. So cataloging, which we now refer to digital objects, we use the term metadata. It's essentially the same thing. So archival material depends a lot on the description of the archival record. The most useful, most rare and wonderful material recording will have no value if you don't know what's on it. And if you don't have a way that it's represented in your catalog or in your system or whatever, because then nobody's ever going to find it. And as a result, it becomes very necessary for preservation, because there's no point in preserving something without the information. And very often the information is used more than the actual material, because there's many, many advantages to it, is that the more information you have, the less handling of the original. You can't be going through or browsing. It's not like a library where you just browse through books. You can't browse through 100 tapes to find the exact item you're looking for. You are going to rely on the catalog. You're going to rely on the metadata. And to create systems of access, it becomes extremely important. So how you create your system is a lot on the intent, is who you see as the audience. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when we are in the world of audiovisual archiving that we share with all audiovisual media, there will be those areas that are common to all audiovisual. You will want to look at the kind of material, whether it's older material, you look at the type of tape and so on. Today you look at the bits, the bytes, the kind of format, what kind of waveform it is, all of those. But apart from that, when you're looking at the content, the way you organize will be based on who you consider your audience is. How does that reflect? The kind of fields that you choose, the kind of information is dependent on the intended audience. You will put in what you think your users, the way your users want to access. So if it's audiovisual material and it's to be used by an ad agency who wants to use it for stock, it'll be different. A documentary filmmaker will use it, will want to have different fields. A researcher will have different fields. A practitioner, a musician will have different fields that they want. So who is the person you're trying to reach? Of course, there are some common points, but the way you organize your material will definitely be dependent on that. And then we will come to the problems of subjectivity, which is something all archivists and curators have to guard against. Because we create categories, we describe, and we have to be very careful that we're not subjective in our own thinking, that is, comes into the cataloging, comes into the metadata, and hence influences how it is accessed. So the integrity of the information is very important for it to be as close as possible to the creator of that or to the depositor or whatever it is, that we don't put our own thinking on it. However, there are areas when we do. So a distinction I like to make is primary and secondary. Primary data is what is captured while being recorded. That there is no way. So when it is recorded, by whom it is recorded, what the date was, time was, what was the occasion, can only be done by the person who's present at the recording. But then we have a secondary level that can be brought in using community or using experts, using researchers, and we often do that to fill in the gaps. Somebody else can listen to and identify a rag, or people are able to identify performers very often, or we say, okay, what's the context of this kind of song? A person in the community knows that. So we are able to use some secondary ways to improve our cataloging and metadata. Now, when we are dealing with a large amount of information, it's very important for us to have standards. Now, there are cataloging standards that are there in the world, coming out of library systems and others. There is the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, or there is the Archive of the Moving Image. There are various professional societies that have come out with standards. But it's not just following international standards, but the need of standardization. A catalog will not be useful unless you have standardized how you use it, how you're consistent in using it. So there's a need for standardization and consistency. And when we come to metadata, there are various kinds of schemas available for preservation, for management, and intellectual, what we're interested in metadata. So preservation metadata deals with information that you would like to have for preservation. What was the format at first one? What kind of process was done? So that you capture all that metadata in the creation of your digital copy. Then there's a lot of information that's to help you manage your collection, where it is kept, who created it, what happened, your institutional stuff. And what we would like to focus on more is the more intellectual, what is called, which is more content oriented. So why do we need metadata at all coming on from cataloging? It's the impact of computerization on retrieval, which has made it necessary for us to move on to metadata. Now, if you look at metadata is of two kinds. One that is within a digital file. If you, as you all know, you must have often hit right click and properties, and you see that you can see today, if it's an audio, you can see what bit rate it is, you can see a name, you can see the format in which it was created, you can see the date on which it was created. Similarly, with image files, you get to see information. Now, that is the kind of metadata that is in the file and travels with the file, which makes it very useful and it can be extracted. But today we also have a lot of metadata which resides in a database, which can be linked to that object. So it's like the more old-fashioned idea of a catalog, but dealing and being linked to digital objects. So digitization of audiovisual media has made us necessary for us to move on to metadata. Also, the necessity of sharing information across networks and the internet brings about a need for us to use more standardized forms of metadata, because the information has to travel with the digital objects. There's a lot of material on metadata of audiovisual archiving, and there are various sources for anybody who's interested. So I'd like to move on to giving a few examples from our work. So what we have at ARCE is looking at the Archives and Research Center for Ethnomusicology. When we are looking at more content-oriented, how have we tried to deal with it? Because we could not find standards that would work for our situation. Not in India, and not more specifically in an ethnomusicology archive which dealt with music in all kinds of contexts. So what we have done is we have created the context of performance. The idea is we want to provide rather the context in a widest possible way of every music recording that we have. We've done that by creating a database of the items, of the tracks, supported by a database of genres and of one of performers. So, and that has created, as we all know, that we need to create, we can do this kind of thing, but we need standard terms and thesauri. So various kinds of thesaurus, because we will have spelling variations, we'll have synonyms and related terms. So we have to deal with these three every time you try and create your own vocabulary of using this. So how do you deal with synonyms? You may say, okay, you have 20 ways of spelling a single rag. We've all come across this, or a community, or this. So you can say, okay, this, see that, and then sometimes you have to have related terms. Very often, say for musical instruments, if you use the indigenous term, then you have to see, you've got similar words in other parts of the country. How do you link them? So it's only by creating some kind of background thesaurus that you can deal with this. So just giving a few examples from our materials, not treating you to all 45 fields every time, but just to give an idea of how, oh God, there's a spelling mistake then, in indigenous term. So we use always the indigenous terms for every genre, for every instrument, and so on. We do not use a more universal term, but we also support them with genre terms and description. So I might say alha, but then my term will be that it's an oral epic performed in Madhya Pradesh, so on. You want to use community. As we know, caste, community, tribe are very important in India. Language, we use ISO codes there. The kind of occasion, the kind of event, we would like to include. The kind of patronage becomes very important. And what we call stylistic affiliation. Every tradition tends, or not every, or many traditions in India tend to have a lineage or a region or some ways that the style is done. So few terms that we come across, gharana in our Hindustani music, or akhada in many forms, silsila in Qawwali, and so on. So there are actually terms for various lineages. It may be sometimes to a place or a particular teacher or a particular kind of poet. So, those forms come up. And when we are going for every item, then there are all these 5 W's, I always say. So what it is, where it is recorded, when, by who, for who. These are basics that we would always use, but we would like to look at what the melodic terms might be, rhythmic terms. If there's related epics, because so many of our forms are related to certain of the Ramayana, Mahabharata, Upanishad, and so on. And that is also interesting. The performers, the instruments, the performance context. So this is giving you a little idea of the kind of fields that we have started using, and we have some thousands of entries now, not complete by any way, but this is give you a glimpse into the way that you can organize your archives. You can create metadata that's using the content, going beyond the actual recording to provide a wider context of the tradition, which hopefully survives along with the recording. In coming to, I think good timing, coming to the last topic, and I think the most important in many ways today is the issue of intellectual property rights, of the law and ethics. Now these are continuously shifting. The way that we think of them are shifting, the laws are changing very often, and the way we think about them is changing. So how is it reflected in the archives? And archives has to deal with this through creating guidelines, manuals, through its policies, to creating agreements and contracts. These are some of the ways that archives have to deal with the issues of rights. So we have ethical and legal issues which come from two sides, and they often overlap. Now we feel that ethical norms that we talk about in archives a great deal, they come to the foreground when the law fails to protect. We find that the Copyright Act fails to protect many things. There are customary laws and practices which it doesn't defend. There is the increasing importance given to free prior informed consent that is moving from the ethical realm to the legal form. So taking free prior informed consent is entering certain laws, and the possible conflict between copyright and state laws. So this is the kind of conflict between laws and ethics that we see. So what is copyright largely deals with individuals' rights, and there is nothing that deals with community rights, which is what is the largest part that we need in the kind of work with music. And now the only thing that we have as an international instrument there is traditional cultural expression created by WIPO. So ethics in practice, and so we think, where does ethics come into an archive? We always talk about ethics only with the idea of access. We think it's only for dissemination and access that we have to have ethics, because that is where we are dealing with giving material out. But actually, it affects every aspect of archival work. We don't have time to go into why and how, but what you acquire, how you select and prioritize, how you preserve, what you preserve, the kind of cataloging and metadata that you do, the kind of policies for access and dissemination, obviously. So ethics comes into every part of archival work. So in the law today, what do we have? We have performer right and fair dealing. But what are the inadequacies? We have oral traditions are not protected. There's no moral and ethical rights. There are no community rights. Local considerations have no space. And international conventions are not always part of our law. There's cultural sensitivities, including indigenous communities, custodianship of the materials, and their guardianship of access. These are things that we are not able to deal with in the law. So what are the kinds of problems that we have faced? Is, as archives, we face the problem that a lot of people, there's a lack of literacy in the people we're dealing with. Very often it's culturally inappropriate to ask people to sign contracts when you're doing field work. There's various perceptions of ownership among stakeholders, which doesn't allow us to take permissions the way we would want, difficulty in identifying leaders or stakeholders, and the difficulty of taking permissions in festivals and public events. Similarly, creators and communities feel that their individual and community rights are very often overlap, that there is not enough acknowledgement and attribution, protection of artistic integrity. The issue of revenue and profits creates another problem, and access to archival materials for communities. This is a major problem that many community members feel, that yes, we get recorded, but we ourselves don't have access to these archives. So I think we could go more about this issue, but as time is up, I would close here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shubha Chaudhuri. Friends, you will agree with me that 40 years of experience really shows she's really given a whole exhaustive kind of presentation. It was very interesting as to what to preserve. She said unique material. Archives are basically not just a collection, but preservation also is the main motive. And presenting the past for future is something that we must remember. And I would like to take this opportunity to inform all of you, if you already don't know, that NCPA has huge archives of very, very precious material starting with 1969. Till today, we are trying to archive and preserve the things. And as Shubha said, we try to preserve it in pristine conditions, and today also trying to digitize some of the recordings so that it can be made available to the larger public. So Shubha, the first question a friend has asked is that are there any courses for the archiving of music if one wants to get formal training?
I'm sorry, there are no formal courses in India. We occasionally, various organizations, NCPA and us and so on, people hold workshops from time to time. And if you keep in touch with some archives, and that's the only thing. There are, of course, I think courses, internships abroad as well. But you might want to look at internships as a possible way of getting training.
So Shubha, am I right in saying that today, as against the time that we were discussing before the workshop, that today you don't find such organizational archives. When people are talking, they are doing it for personal reasons or in their own personal way, like you mentioned, with the technology available at one's beck and call, and you don't need to have any experts, etc., etc. So do you think that now so-called the idea of organizational archives like NCPA or ARC or is kind of at the backseat?
No, I don't think they're backstage. I think they're existing, but I just wanted to bring up this other thing because it's something we don't talk about when we talk about institutions, and we wanted to look at the Indian context, and I thought we had to mention the fact that there is this whole universe that is outside the archives. I think on the other hand, interestingly, a number of archives in India has gone up a lot in the last few years. There's a greater interest in archiving, whether it fits the definition that you and I call it's a different matter, but there's a lot of archives coming up. So maybe because digital technology makes it much easier or whatever, but there is a greater interest. So I feel, yes, there are a lot of organizational archives, but there is a lot of, and we're talking about music and audiovisual content, there's a lot that's being created in the undocumented space.
So it is just very informal kind of
is also going on. Yes, what I mean is that's another world that we cannot ignore.
Yes, true. I have a big box of precious DATs gone sticky and some with noticeable mold. How do I retrieve the content?
Well, DAT is most notoriously prone to problems with humidity. So if you're in a humid space, that's likely to be more so. The way to try and restore that is to see cold and dry storage. That would be the way, and then hopefully if you have access to that recorder, they can be replayed. So cold and dry, and there's also ways of doing low temperature ovens which deal with hydrolysis of tapes. So that's the way you would have to retrieve that.
Yes. Someone is asking, where have the booklets of old Hindi films from 1930s been archived and preserved? Would you know?
I really don't know, but there is
Some motion picture, something.
No, there is the various people who have made collections, including the Neville Tully, did a lot of collection, and he now has the Institute, Neville Tully, the Institute of Tully Institute of Indian Studies. He might have got a lot, but there was this, there is this collection of Hindi film songs done by one Mr. Garg, I think. This couple of volumes of them, which we have in our library. So there are people who've been making these collections. I'm sure we have some, but I'm sure there are other archives that do. But popular music is also an area that more archives should be looking at.
I think the friend was asking a larger and talking about the films itself, not only film music.
Oh, film music. So that's the film archive, and
exactly.
I think that today the Film Heritage.
From Pune, right?
No, the Film Heritage Corporation, whatever, in Bombay now, Mr.
Okay.
Dungarpur is doing a lot of work with restoring old films.
Yes.
But we, of course, have the National Film Archive of India.
So the music will be part of that film.
The music
actually.
is part of it, yes.
Yeah. Thank you for this presentation. I have seen that in India, most archives either do not have any ethical charter at all, or they only subscribe to the ethical charter of the international institution they are affiliated to. Can you tell me if your institution has an ethical charter? If yes, can you tell us what unique challenges specific to India you faced while formulating it?
I don't think we have a charter as such, but we try to follow very ethical practices to the extent we can. We have an agreement that we enter into, legal agreement with every collector that allows them to choose the degree of access that they wish. We do not give recordings. We follow the performer right, and so copies are not given or published without the performer's permission. If we have any paid use, then it is shared with we only have one where we upload our recordings to the Smithsonian Global Sound Folkways, where 25% of every download goes to the performer. So various things like that. We encourage the depositors that we have changed our agreement form so that performer can always get a copy, that no agreement will preclude access to the performer and to their families. We also encourage people to allow community access. So these are some of the ways that we have included in our agreements and in our terms of use.
Yeah, so it's a fair and practices. Try to stick to that.
Yes, and the difficulties, of course, is that, when you take in collections, as we do, we take in collections that have already been made by people. Now, they may not have got all the permissions. Now, that is a major drawback. So, if you don't have those permissions for access, then we can't give. We would give listening only. But if we don't have, those people haven't got the permissions, then we cannot take it for granted. And we cannot expect that everybody had known that they are some point going to put this collection into an archive. So we encourage people when they go out is to make sure that if they're starting their work, to get the right permissions. But if they haven't and we have such recordings, then that's a challenge. And to keep the trust of the performer community is very important, that people should know that this archive will not part with recordings unless they have the right permission.
Shubha,
even it may be available on YouTube.
So you are very right. Often every time when I announce the concert at the NCPA, I have to request the public that please don't try to record. They think that they have no today's people, because of such a easy mobile access and that recording, whatever device they have, they think that it is okay to do anything, that recording that they want. And I have to often remind them of the copyright and how NCPA stands tall in protecting that copyright, and people find it very strange. They think that why not? I'm just listening to some good music and let me just record it and share it with my friends. That is one way of looking at it, but the artist also protests, saying that their music is taken for granted. So do you think that kind of awareness now has to come to the public, that easy access and easy sharing is one thing, but copyright of the artist and what is
Yeah.
they are due, that should also take precedence?
It's true, and you find commonly in every concert recording going on, and some people object and some don't. And it's not just sharing with friends; it'll be on YouTube the next morning. And now some people say, "Oh, it's giving more publicity." So today, unfortunately, that's why the recording industries come to a halt, and musicians are not able to earn from recordings. So the only way is that if they get more popular, they can only earn through concerts. And so they look at, now this is looking at the economics of music in a different way. So people are looking for larger and larger fees for performance, because that's become the only way, because there's no revenue now from recordings at all. It's because of the widespread use of recordings being made by anybody and everybody.
So the next question is connected. Without these YouTube channels doing such kind of unauthorized uploads of these unpublished recordings, our access to Indian classical music recordings would greatly reduce. Is then having more and wider access not more important than waiting for an authorized upload, which in a lot of cases does not end up happening?
Well, there are certain platforms coming up giving you authorized access with payment, which is shared with performers and so on. And I think we can only look forward to more of that. We did listen. You could listen free on the radio for all this time. Television, unfortunately, apart from Doordarshan, nobody is putting traditional music. There's a lot of published recordings out there, but if we only want free access, then I think we have to rethink our own priorities.
Yes, very well said, that we are all looking for free access, for something which somebody could earn from, but we
That's
want
right.
it free, and that seems to be the challenge.
A
So in
sense
this
of
case,
entitlement in our users, basically. Yes.
So do you think that maybe one solution could be the artist, putting this out for themselves and trying to look after their interests by charging for whatever it is?
Yeah, because I think there are platforms coming out, whether it's SoundCloud or here or there, the subscription-based models. There are online platforms coming up which are authorized, and every now and then we are approached by somebody or the other to contribute to them. So I think there are options coming up, but people have to be able to, and of course YouTube also has a takedown policy. If somebody objects, they do take down, but I think it becomes very difficult for anybody to maintain that.
But the basic problem is that the audiences want everything free.
Yeah, but the thing is that those who are putting up is not being done for free. They are earning from ad revenue. So it's a very, it's a, so there's a benefit in those who are uploading.
So in the whole bargain, the audiences get free, the channels like YouTube make money with the ads, but the artist whose music and creativity is being presented is the victim.
That is what I find is so unethical about the whole situation. Yes.
How many music archives are there in India and in the world?
I really don't have a number, because in India, on the national level, we are there, Sangeet Natak Academy is there, Sangeet Research Academy is there, NCPA is there. But the Music Academy in Chennai has an archive, but there are many regional archives which may not be just of music, but and some are. I don't really have a number in either case. I'm sorry.
Maybe Google will give.
I doubt. I doubt. But yeah, it's hard to have a number. Sorry about that.
Okay. If a family would like to preserve the recordings of a musician in an archive, how should they go about it? What will be the typical timeline of the project, and what will be the cost involved?
Well, I'm sure that varies with different archives. In our case, we take in deposits and there's no cost involved. What do you mean by timeline? I don't know. I mean, how long you have to wait for it to get digitized? That would depend at different times. on how much of a waiting where we are, because we are short-staffed like many archives. So, and what you get is that it gets preserved, eventually gets digitized. You have full rights over the kind of access you want to give, and there's no payment involved.
So
That
Shubha,
is
it's
with
like,
us.
in a way, it's a service that
Yes.
the archives is offering.
Yes.
That there is no fees to the artist.
There's no fees.
But they can be rest assured
That it
their
will be
music will be
preserved.
preserved
That's
in
right.
whatever the latest technology
Yes,
available.
and the access will depend on how much access they want to give.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Would you recommend secure cloud storage as an off-site option for archives?
Well, it is a option to which a lot of archives are going to. We have not at this point because it was not very affordable. But there have been cases of cloud storage also being open to ransomware and so on. We've, as an archive without cloud storage, faced 2 attacks of ransomware around the time of just after the lockdown. It was quite strange why somebody would target us. But British Library really was brought down to its knees. Now, they must have had very good security, but whole of British Library, the entire digital storage came down last year. They were down to, even if you went on the desk, they didn't even have user registration records available. You had to fill in a paper. So, cloud can get accessed by hackers. That is the only problem. But well, a lot of people say if Amazon can't keep it secure, then who can? But so it is like many forms. It is dangerous. It's an option, but not very cheap in India, at least for large amounts. For small amounts, yes.
Other side of the technology, hackers.
Yeah.
In village and community music programs, we often record bhajans and performances in local languages, thinking of them as cultural memory for the next 50 to 100 years. Once recorded, how should individuals preserve these materials properly, and when, if at all, should they be made public in an ethical way?
Well, keeping them safe depends on what you recorded. Keeping it on your phone is not going to be a very permanent way. So you have to look at what it is that you're recording. And sharing in an ethical way would mean the permission. People don't mind it being given. You should take the permission when you record, if they don't mind it being given. And obviously, everybody thought that if you make money, you should share it. But today people say, oh, I'm not making money, I'm just sharing it. But the person may feel that their audience is going down, because when you go to such bhajan gatherings and all, you make some little offerings, and people do earn from those things. But people like to be recorded also. They might want a recording. So I think you have to engage with the performers. That would be the ethics.
Yeah. So I think the ethical norms will vary subjectively.
Yeah.
Could you please say a little bit more on the gap between international conventions and our own laws vis-a-vis musical archiving?
Well, you see, these laws are different in different countries. Like in some, our Copyright Act doesn't deal with a lot of our traditional music at all. Now, in some ways, it's good. We have performer right, but it isn't really, nobody really follows it. But different countries, so there's no international one law, but say in some countries the recordist has the rights. So it varies in different ways. Now moral rights are coming in more and more, or free informed consent is coming into many laws. It's not there in our Copyright Act up to now. So moral rights comes in. So I had a few slides, but I didn't time it well enough. So what happens is people are very often concerned with the integrity of the performance. Like you take some performance or music or whichever it is, and you alter it in ways that the person feels is not sticking to the spirit of it, and artists mind that, or the community minds the way it is used. So those are the moral rights that they have over something. So today we say, so we have very often the case of films using traditional music in ways that are not always in the spirit in which it was there. You have devotional things being made into a very popular or a raunchy thing sometimes. But on the other hand, we can always say that how many performers also take from film music. So it goes both ways. But so moral rights, to preserve what they see as the authenticity of that particular tradition is an important fact that we don't have in our act.
So, ma'am, you raised a crucial topic of copyright and identifying the custodian of community music. Archives will give access to these content. However, how can we ensure the communities benefit from the commercial exploitation of these art forms and music?
Well, that is up to the ethical standards being followed by the archives. But you see, I think that one of the ways, and sometimes I have been able to be fortunate to be involved in such things, is to make performers more aware of their rights. The problem is very often we find in communities that people don't have a good idea. They have a huge range. They think either everybody who's recording them is going to become very rich, which doesn't happen. These kind of recordings don't have a big market, or they have no value. They're just happy that somebody is recording. So, for people to know what are their rights and what they can expect is important, and that's the only way if we empower the communities. But you see, when we're talking about community knowledge, it goes in two ways. You have professional performances, which are there, and then you have, just public performances where people may be getting together and singing bhajans or whatever. It's not very specialized. But so how they view the importance of their tradition is something, that is very difficult to ascertain. And if they are more, aware of their own rights, then they can probably negotiate it better.
And also at the beginning, you yourself said that archive is for the unique material. It is not for everything and anything, right? We talk about archives, archiving, etc. Preserving is okay. Like I want to preserve something belongs to my father has sung or whatever. And we don't always think about whether it is unique or not, because it's a kind of a emotional thing for us. Am I right? In so many of these public things.
No, what we are saying by unique, meaning it's a one-off. It is not same as published.
Special.
Not special, just one-off. You see, just unique means it's one thing of which there are not many copies.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
so would the
we are not talking about the importance of the content. That's now where it comes into selection and acquisition policies of the particular archive, what they want as their policy as to what they will take in.
Okay, so this is my question to you. When the NCPA archive started in 1969, I am told that the musicians were performing. There were concerts and performances, but some of the musicians, great legendary musicians, were invited specially, and they were given instruction to sing their very special repertoire. So would that qualify as unique material?
Yeah, of course that is unique. But what I mean to say, by unique, I didn't mean unique in a qualitative sense. It's more in a quantitative. Unique, when we say archives have unique documents, meaning they're not published.
Okay.
There's not 100 of that same recording out there.
Okay, I get your point.
Yeah.
So this is something very close to your subject. Thanks for the lecture, ma'am. It's very enlightening. I'm a PhD scholar working in the Mirasi community. I'm facing a lot of issues while taking interviews. Could you please guide me how to reach out to people and preserve the oral history as recorded in their songs?
That's a tough one to just answer just like that. Maybe you can write to NCPA and get my contact, and we can be in.
Yes. So actually, the next question was like that.
Yeah.
Shubha, can Ma'am Chaudhuri's email be shared with us?
Yes.
The next question is like that. So do you have permission to share your email? Email
ID? Certainly, yes.
Yeah? Okay, that answers that. How is AI going to impact institutional archiving?
That's a very, very important one, and that all archives are discussing non-stop. About how many jobs are going to be lost in the already tough world of archives. So it is a little tough to make out. There are obviously very useful tools for maybe carrying out certain repetitive tasks that can be done, or creating abstracts. So hopefully we can use it to reduce some of the very mundane jobs. But I think we have to be very careful how we use AI so it doesn't become a replacement for things where human intelligence is needed. It's a big temptation, as all of us see, who are getting more and more applications that are obviously created by ChatGPT. So this is a problem. We can see how easy it is to succumb to it. But for archives, I think we could have some tools, is what a lot of people are discussing, to reduce some of the very repetitive monotony when we have to create records or metadata and so on.
The next question is very peculiar. A very important aspect of Indian classical music is improvisation. How do we archive aspects like spontaneity and improvisation?
Well, when you preserve a recording, you get a record of the spontaneity and the
Yes.
improvisation, because you record it as is. So
those elements are anyway recorded.
Are anyway recorded.
Yeah, and somebody
yes.
later perhaps has to explain that to you, that
Yes.
this is, please look
It's
at this.
interpretation.
And this is
Look
what
at that. Yes.
Yes, and that
Yes.
is what we do, friends. When we have our listening sessions, we invite a guide to give us the guidance as to what to listen and what to.
How to listen.
Yes,
Yes.
how to listen. How do we ensure that digitizing Indian music is not just postponing decay into another format, especially when technologies, codecs, and platforms age faster than traditional themselves?
Then faster than traditions.
You know what he means? I think that technology
Yeah.
fades faster than the traditions. So how do
Yeah.
we go on changing? I mean,
We have to go on. That's what I was saying. It's a constant, migration of digital content that we are forced into. That's one of the problems of digitization, that formats keep getting extinct. You remember floppy disks? Nobody remembers them now. They were digital.
now there is a question which you choose. If you choose not to answer, it's your choice. Ma'am, I want to know who funds your institution. Is it funded by the American government, given the title American in the title of your institute, or the Indian government? Can we donate money to your institute?
I will take the last bit first.
Yes.
Donations always welcome. We are not funded by either government. The American Institute of Indian Studies is a consortium of universities in the US. That's what the parent body is under the umbrella. We are also registered in India as an educational institution. So we do occasionally get grants from the Indian government for some things.
And special projects, you mean?
Yes, and the institute gets what they call, not currently, but from the State Department, as they come, 4 fellowships for the US fellows who come to India. So American Institute has a lot of things under its umbrella. The archives is just one thing, and we are totally in India, and our purpose for starting this archive was to create an archive in India, primarily where collections held of Indian music abroad could be brought to India. That was our primary aim. So we are very India-centered, and we are always short of money and would be extremely happy for any donations, I repeat.
Good. Now we still have 5 minutes, Shubha. Would you like to talk about the thing that you said really intrigued me? You said today the idea of research is internet research.
Yes.
Unlike what you and me engaged in, So would you like to just talk about it a little bit?
Well, that's all there is to say to it, is that people are somehow not being taught to use libraries or do not want to use them, are not looking at the
By
written
library,
word
you
so
mean
much.
authentic sources.
I also mean libraries, books. People are just saying
Yes.
if there's some article posted online and they
Yeah.
can find it easily.
Yeah.
The other day, I'd give you an example, something that we both know and I work with, is somebody who came and said they wanted to do a project on Manganiyars because that person had a feeling that there is nothing available on them. No, that is such a popularly performing community that she knew, but she's not aware of any scholarly work. There is some probably online, but that is so far from the truth of one community that's been highly researched. So if you can't find very easily a few articles online, then it doesn't exist. If there are whole books written, it doesn't exist. So I mean actual libraries also people are not looking at. Forget going to archives. So we always get the impression that, we are there for foreigners, because foreign students are trained differently. The minute they land in India, they start looking where are the archives to go to. Even when they didn't know us, they will find you online and they will come to use. But most of our Indian students are only interested in the library at most. But there even the performance students will say, can I listen to Vilayat Khan because I'm studying from that Gharana or whatever. Or they listen to various, renditions of the same rag that they're studying, or whatever instruments they are, or whatever, that the students look for using archives as a way of learning, which is somehow not being encouraged or not being encouraged by our universities. I don't know, but it's also frankly to me very lazy, to just Google everything. And after all, Google is not human intelligence. It's following some algorithm. It picks up something, doesn't pick up something. Does it mean it doesn't exist? So I think my fear is that a lot of original thinking will go down. On the other hand, very good research gets published every year if you reach it.
So when you compare the international and the Indian way of researching, so-called, then that is the way we have formulated the process of going into research, right? For our students, that kind of research methodology, what we say, is, that lacks that rigor of going to archives, as you said, that compulsion is lacking.
Yeah,
correct?
Increasingly. I find that a lot of students are told, some people say, I said, how come you heard of us? Oh no, my professor said when you go to India first spend 1 week in ARC library or whatever, listen to. So they're used to, but I think that is changing. I do find now that courses are using at least recordings in the classroom. But that doesn't mean that the universities want to have an archive or deal with the archive at all. I mean, you can't set up your own archive, but send your students. So I find there's a big variation in the kind of teachers. There's a time when a lot of students from Kathak Kendra used to come for a short while. And that I found because there were students who were recording, who would mention that there's this archive and they can go and see. Or JNU students, we have phases when the certain professor will encourage them to go and look at the archive. So then there's a flow of students for a while. So, it is a lot up to the teachers, I feel, and not to just make everything spoon-fed and so easily available. But I have had faculty members who say, I can't afford, it takes a lot of money for me to get things legally, so I just show pirated films in my class. So it's it's on all sides.
So perhaps finally, what Dr. Anade, our mentor, used to say that don't blame the technology. It's going to evolve, but it is up to you to use it, misuse it, or abuse it.
Yes.
So that's it. I mean, technology is going to evolve. That is the nature of technology and the things around us in today's world. But how ethically you are going to, deploy that is really matters a lot.
And how much you think about things and don't rely on easy solutions. Yes.
So friends, with that, we'll once again express our gratitude to Dr. Shubha Chaudhuri for such an enlightening, exhaustive presentation. And thanks to you. Please stay with us. We will have more such workshops. Thank you.
Thank you very much.